Audio Content Lab.
Podcast marketers and performing musicians have more in common than we think. Both are using sound to connect with crowds, both aren't necessarily shy when the record light goes red, and both believe in the adage that practice makes perfect. But what other similarities might these overlapping disciplines have? Today we talk with songwriter, musician, and podcast producer Lynz Floren about this nexus, and learn about ways both marketers and musicians can orchestrate and conduct themselves and deliver value in all venues, from the green room to the boardroom. Let's get to it.
It sounds like marketing.
It sounds like marketing.
Welcome to Sounds Like Marketing, the audio content marketing podcast that's here to dial businesses and brands into the importance of sound. I'm Jake Sanders. I'm joined by Paul Julius. Paul, how are you, sir?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited. Amped.
This is a fantastic episode. And I figured we should start it with a hot take on an article that we found on openmicuk.co.uk. If you really need to know where it's at. you got
Totally
it.
legit, I swear.
We get it. It's entitled Stage Performance Tips for Singers, What You Should Do and What You Should Never Do. And later in this interview, we get into with Lynz, who is a performing musician, has experience there. We noticed a lot of corollaries in between performing on stage and marketing. And so I think this article is really amazing. It says stage performance techniques are ideas singers can use to transform them from an average performer to a potential star. Learning how to perform on stage is a skill that all singers should master if they wish to be successful in the music industry. And I think it just aligns with, basically the stage is the place where your audience is, and the performance is the marketing that you choose to throw on them. And so I'll just go through this list of what you should do, what they think you should do, and then we'll talk about how that relates to marketing, and then the list of things that you should not do and how that relates to marketing. So the list is what you should do. Make sure you learn your lyrics. Practice performing as much as possible. Sing with emotion. Break from your character. Know your audience. Acknowledge other performers. Get physical while on stage. Make use of the whole space and get close. Express your emotions physically and let the audience see your eyes. And for me, what I think really stands out to this is know your audience. I think a lot of marketers are just thinking anyone with money is my audience.
No, that's a great point. I mean, you're not going to walk into a jazz club with an Ibanez guitar and start shredding, Metallica. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it translates.
Or conversely, you go into a blues club and then, you're really focused on, shredding those lines rather than really getting a story across. And so I think how that translates is that you really have to understand your customers, what they're thinking, what they've expressed to you and what they haven't. There's indirect research that needs to go on. And something that happens when you're on stage is you can see people's faces, and if they're if they're not feeling it, you can make adjustments, but you really have to be understanding what is expected and then open to receiving information that lets you know that you're off base. And I think marketers could learn a ton from this because, maybe some of your communications is aligned to one specific, client, but you're ignoring, other people who factor into those decisions. So, just thinking kids love this juice that I'm selling. But
Millennials. What are the millennials buying, Jake?
Well, and then you'd have to understand where are the millennials getting that money from, and also does the mom goes and buys the juice, for the kids. So, it's fun marketing for kids, but really it needs to be hitting on adults with kids, So for me, I think know your audience is maybe the one that I would take away from that and say that it really comports with marketing.
I agree with you, and I think it kind of ties into to what Lynz talks a little bit about later about how people making podcasts forget the audience, and
Yeah.
they're making this podcast essentially for themselves. And
Right.
I think in a larger sense too, a lot of these tips really do work well for podcasters too. I mean, even if you're
Yeah.
not
Oh,
looking
yeah.
into the whole marketing aspect, and that's the one that I really like out of the to-do list is express your emotions physically.
Mm.
Like when I'm on the mic or when I'm interviewing somebody or something like that, I'm moving my arms, I'm nodding, I'm doing stuff and moving around. And I think it matters. Like people can tell when you're happy on the phone and you're smiling, that comes through. And
Huge.
don't think it doesn't come through when you're recording a podcast or those social media posts. Like there's so many companies that really successfully are kind of tongue in cheek or snarky or funny. It's because they project that. That's how they are. And I think that to me is the to do. You got to let that hang out, and it's a big risk. I mean, Jake, I think like you were talking about being on stage and stuff. It's a risk. It's a
Yeah.
risk to kind of expose yourself like that. But if you don't, people can see like you're not fully there. You're not giving them what they came to the club to see.
Absolutely. Active listening while you're recording a podcast, saying, yes, oh, I hear what you're saying. And, maybe you're on a sales call or something and saying, you said something earlier that, blah, 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 like if you just show people that you're listening and you're really trying to understand, you can really make a deep connection. And yeah, I totally agree with you. So what about
Yeah.
this list of things not to do?
Oh, I love this list. I love everything about this, and I've probably done them all. Okay, here we
Yeah,
go.
right?
Not to do. Stop singing or get distracted by a heckler.
Mm.
Since it happens to the best singers. Scratch yourself unless you really, really can't wait. Tune up your instrument or look unprepared. This is a good one right here. Say sorry and apologize when you make a mistake.
Yeah.
Keep your eyes closed. Fall out with fellow musicians or audience members. Do more talking than actual performing.
Mm.
Let your ego get in the way of a great performance. Forget where it is you are playing and say the wrong city name. And the last one, get too drunk you can't play and sing properly.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, all of these are really great and could easily be transferred to the marketing profession. Is there one that stood out to you? I mean, I see one.
I think saying sorry is I just want to qualify that. It's okay to be sorry that you messed up.
Right. Key.
But don't say it. I think there's something about when you're it's about your approach, right?
Mhm.
You have to understand that mistakes are going to happen and it's just part of it, right?
Mhm.
So you don't have to acknowledge it. Like that's just the whole thing. Like if we're recording, like you and I have, I mean, geez, I don't know how many hundreds of hours that we've recorded with each other.
Yeah.
It's like we all know you're going to mess up. You're going to cough. You do whatever. Hold it. I want to do it again. Boom. Fine.
Mhm.
That's it. That's how we work.
Mhm.
Everybody understands that. Like,
Mhm.
and especially when you're on stage, yeah, don't do that, man. People are there because they expect you to be the person up there with that experience. And if you're like, oh,
Mm.
I'm sorry, or that was, that was a thing. Like, honestly, man, most folks, like if you just keep rolling, they won't even notice,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, and Lynz talks about it later. He has a diverse set of experience that helped him learn how to command attention from an audience. And I think
Yeah.
that's really what marketers are looking for. They want to
Yeah.
command attention. I mean, obviously you want conversions, you want those bottom funnel things, but if we're doing top of funnel activities, you really have to make sure that you're focusing in on commanding and holding attention. And content marketing, podcast, that's a great way to do it. Show some relatability with that audience. Like we said, that's super important. But I thought the one that stuck out to me was stop singing or get distracted by a heckler. Like there's so many opportunities for marketers to receive unwarranted feedback or maybe just kind of like not helpful. and it will stop them in their tracks,
Yeah.
particularly if it comes from somebody who's, a stakeholder, like the CMO or, the CEO doesn't like a certain campaign or something. You can't get distracted by that, but you have to remember why you're there, and it's to command and hold attention. If you say you're sorry and you apologize when you make a mistake, you've sort of given up that command and shown yourself as a fallible thing. But it's okay to be fallible. I think that's another point that you made, which
Yeah.
is really expert, is look, you're not going to get it right all the time, but how you perform when things go wrong is really the true measure of successful performance. Like, oh man, I messed that up. Are you going to stop or are you going to keep going? And musicians don't have a choice. The beat goes on. The show must go on. But marketers can stop, retool their strategy, get a wind of some weird customer feedback and just go down a strategic rabbit hole, with tactics following them. And then at the end, they're going to say, well, why did you do that? Why didn't you kind of hold on to the strategy first? And that's why I think knowing the strategic importance of your role, knowing the tactics that you can use to get there, but also making sure that you're paying attention to feedback, but not letting it stop the performance. Like you have to hold to it, and until you hit that goal, we don't know if it worked or not.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, we talk about a little with Lynz too, like negative feedback is still feedback. You know what I mean? The worst is just apathy. We don't get anything back. So, don't necessarily think like, oh, someone didn't like it. I mean, but at least you heard about it, like they're listening. So
Right.
that's,
Yep. I mean, you make a great point. And there are so many instances where musicians and marketers and performing on stage and performing in front of a public, all that overlaps. And we're so lucky that we got to sit down with Lynz Floren, who's a podcast producer. He's a musician, songwriter. I mean, he's been all over the map, but he really gives some deep insight into how we can harness the way we perform and get those results that we want to see. And, it's a fantastic interview. So let's just head over there right now.
Let's go.
Lynz Floren is a podcast coach, producer, consultant, musician, and songwriter that works with brands and businesses on their content marketing strategies. He's worked in many different verticals as a marketer and podcast producer, in many different venues as an audiovisual technician and musician, and he now brings his buffet of experience to the podcast to talk about the self-same subject. Lynz, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is a perfect intersection of the things I'm interested in.
Excellent. We are in the nexus. So I provided a brief bio, but let's start with some more expository stuff on your end. How did you get into podcast marketing? What's your path been from musician to the general manager here at Growth Network Podcast?
Well, thank you. I bought my first sound equipment when I was 15 years old. And it was a PA system. I had a tenor sax. I'd stopped playing saxophone, or I wanted to stop playing saxophone, and I traded my tenor sax in for a PA system. My mother was so mad at me. But that was my first experience touching the knobs, having control over the sound that, I could play my own guitar through and do all those things. So it started really young. It was just an expression of what I was interested in. I went to concerts, I brought microphones, and I would tape things. And the audio stuff has always been where I'm pulled. In college, I went to UC Santa Cruz, and they had an electronic music program that was, not about, it was more about creating compositions that might, work in the classical medium, and being much, more about scoring and than about making beats.
Right.
And so I got a lot of experience there.
Awesome.
And then my first job out of college, I worked at Radio Shack. And again, this is translating the techie stuff to the normie stuff, being able to talk to people who have no understanding and tell them a story that helps them understand the piece of equipment that they say is broken. And it is in fact not broken. They just have not in fact learned how to use it. And what was cool was I got to go through, I was hired as a seasonal hire there, and I ended up getting a full-time position, going through the management training program, managing a store for a couple of years. So I got manager training. I had to work with people in a leadership capacity and intersect this sound and audio experience. Of course, I had to branch out a bit more and learn video and some other technologies to kind of keep up. After that, I went on to do hotel and event audiovisual, so supporting live events, setting up the equipment, running the sound, etc. And then I picked up a side gig as a wedding DJ. Again, it's the same kind of stuff. And that's where I really honed my ability to be on the mic and command attention and know what I'm saying and drive the room, and that's been critical for everything I've done. Who knew that just, hey, we're going to do the cha-cha slide now is a thing that would move you into this kind of stuff. Through the hotel AV, I did that a lot. I serviced projectors on Alcatraz. I've it's been a hodgepodge. What I'll say is that none of this looked like it was connecting at the time. All of it felt like, how do I find out what I'm supposed to be doing? I don't feel like it's right. And it's only just in the last couple of years that I look back and I go, oh, there's a clean through line. It all makes sense.
Right.
So anyone who's earlier on in this process, follow your instinct, try to grow and keep going, and it will all start to make sense, hopefully, on the back end.
Absolutely.
So the next thing I was one of the events people I did was for the LA County Bar Association. We did their events, and then they had a position open to be their event person in charge of the technology, recording the webinars and all that sort of thing. And so I spent 6 years doing this kind of work for the hardest possible audience, which is lawyers. And so really that's where my thick skin really developed, being able to stand up to them, hold my own. And I eventually moved into a marketing position. That's where the leap happened from audio into really marketing, because I'd done a podcast and I'd been, the whole marketing team quit at once. And I just said, I'll jump in. And I started doing it. It was hard. It was really, really hard, and not a good fit for me. But that's what drove me to ultimately start my podcast production company and step out of the sort of the regular workforce thing and do all that. So it's, it's been a bit.
So
again,
yeah. Oh, sorry. No, I just want to ask that first podcast, was that for the LA County Bar?
Yes.
Wow.
Nice.
That's trial by fire right there.
Well, and they didn't ask for it. I just inserted myself,
Perfect.
because lawyers are historically, technologically fearful. They're Luddites, and they do not want, they know what they know, and they don't want to be beginners again on anything. And that's, not true of all of them, but it's pretty true. And so I just said, hey, I have an idea. I could do a podcast for law student. We're trying to thread the needle from law student to member. No one else is doing this. Can I make a project that explains the process of going from law school to becoming a lawyer? And I interviewed law school people and law firm people. And I just had that access from my job, and I just did it. I did have to get permission, and it only happened because we had a new CEO who was coming in while things needed to turn around, and he was open. But that's what gave them this, oh, well, maybe he can do marketing too. And so it showed them a wider skill set.
Nice. And so then moving into marketing, how different, sorry, I kind of interrupted your
No, you're great.
thing there. So I didn't want to, but so moving from that podcast, how was that, to step into was it more like a more traditional marketing role kind of thing? Was that a weird?
It was tough. It's business development and marketing. And it's that's not one person, that's 3 people's jobs. Right. But I consider myself a catalyst. I'm not okay with the status quo. I'm going to push and break things a little bit. And I was sort of willing to come in and push and break some things there and say, I may drop some stuff, but it's better than the rinse and repeat that's not doing anything over here. But it was really hard. I didn't have a template for a marketing plan. I would say that's like still an area I need to go back and like get really clear on, because I'm real good at devising a product and making sure it connects with people, but like getting into the nitty gritty of how that's all going to be executed and showing my work ahead of time. That's really where I struggled, because there wasn't a blueprint for what I was doing, and I was making it up on the fly. And some of that was what was cool, but some of that was why it felt like agony every day for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I think everybody's, early marketing gigs are kind of like that. And even then, I mean, the problem with like a blueprint is that there's no, sometimes there's similar use cases and sometimes there's not. You're just kind of
Mhm.
out there on your own. But I'm kind of curious because it seems like you went away from, I mean, you're still a musician, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So how is that? Like, so it seems like you kind of went away from the saxophone early, but I mean, how do you think being a musician like has helped with the marketing stuff, if it has?
It really has, because I never need, I mean, I stopped the saxophone, but I do, I play guitar and I write songs from that side. I Through the electronic music program, I got into Pro Tools really early, and I've had it for a really long time. And so being able to very quickly bust up a little synth thing I don't have to seek outside music for anything, right? Like, and
Right.
so that means that I'm more agile. I can very quickly make my own sounds and make a finished product like this. I don't have to seek outside stuff. And I think that's
Mhm.
proved really, really helpful. And sometimes they go, oh, that music's okay, but we want something better. And that's when you reach out to a library or something. But more often than not, what it helped me understand was the more completely I can put my idea into a, a semi-final space, the more likely someone is going to adopt it. And so putting that polish, one, there's just the sonic skill of being able to understand microphone technique and everything. But then the musicianship, I'll say, as I learned to video edit, for example, which is not a skill that I natively had, and
Right.
I've learned it against my own instincts.
Wishes, right?
Yeah. Is I cut like a metronome, right?
Yep.
And what I find is that when I see other people's videos who don't have a rhythmic sense, I find that the videos aren't as effective. But if I instinctively cut to the pace of the music, or like this line happens and then right after that's when something is going to go, that sort of move comes to me because I'm a musician, because I hear things in time.
Right.
And so I think in terms of rests and beats and being able to place things. And that's the thing. It's like it's like in the air, like I'm breathing it. I don't know that I'm doing it. And then later I go, oh, well, that's why that was powerful. Okay,
Right.
cool.
Right. Well, and you said something interesting about being a wedding DJ. And I mean, I would assume that's why you're so comfortable, and you have a great voice.
Well, thank you.
But being comfortable in front of a crowd, not 100% sure what's going to happen. Like just speaking personally as a musician, like there's so many marketing people who really do want to have it all drilled down, everything ready, everything like that thinking, showing your work beforehand, like you were saying. But that improvisatory nature, feeling comfortable about flowing with things, that just kind of like naturally is something that marketers don't have. They feel very uncomfortable about communicating to large groups of people, which you're like, ooh, is this the best profession for you? I think, as a musician, I've like died 1,000 times on a stage. So I'm not necessarily all butthurt if it doesn't work. Do you see that, like your kind of tenacity at trying new things, and also your kind of not a lack of fear of failure, but sort of a healthy respect for failure, like in front of people?
I know
Do you
what
think
it
that's
looks
kind of
like.
plucked your
Yeah,
string?
exactly. I know what it looks like, and it's not going to kill me, right? That certainly helps. I'll tell you. So there was a time when I was really feeling like I was going to move towards trying to be a musician, performer, songwriter, like sort of the front thing for a while.
Yeah.
And what I found was I didn't have the stage presence between songs to keep anything going, even though I'd already done the wedding DJ thing at this point, that I hadn't put together any patter. I didn't have, it didn't flow. I was too worried about the song going well, and then I was just like, okay, remembering to breathe afterwards. And so I actually did stand-up comedy for 2 years.
Cool.
And that is the thing that broke me from worrying about saying the wrong thing or anything like that. My instincts have been honed to where no matter what just happened, and it was really like that. That was like a yes and to the wedding DJ skill, I'll
Right.
say. It's like it evolved that piece. And so I really am not afraid of boos, quite frankly, like not just a lack of response, which most people are afraid of nothing. There's like
Right.
nobody's clapping.
Uh,
I can get a negative response, and that's when my funny gene kicks in and I start to really entertain, and
Yeah.
so there's this, I think I had the sense that I had a strong set of things and I just needed to fill in the adjacent spaces so that I was a rounded thing. And it meant I haven't really driven directly in any one direction, but I have a wider set of skills. And at this stage in life, that's way more valuable.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of those skills I love that you just sort of happened into was podcasting. And I mean, you have produced multiple shows. You continue to drive, results and connections with growth marketing podcasts. You understand the power of podcasts and you bring this full suite of skills to it. But marketers, once again, similar to your lawyers, they have preconceptions, things that hold them back. What do you think marketers misunderstand about podcasts specifically?
For one, they are looking to evidence-based solutions for a medium that's still developing. There's still so much ground podcasts haven't covered, and they're concerned with replicating some article they read from 2019. So this is a place where new original things ultimately have some value too, and there's a lot more room to grow and be unique and stand out in ways that no one's even thought of yet. And so I think the need for evidence-based things holds a lot of people back.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is that podcasts in many cases are a multiplier, not the main thing. And so when you have a strong initiative, whether it's a book or a course or an online store or something like that, you have to have the grounding for some income in place or some, metrics one way or another, right, in place. And the podcast is a yes and that adds a multiplier effect. Like I think of it like the video game Tony Hawk Pro Skate. Like what I used to play, you're going through and you're doing a trick. Well, when you pair two tricks together, they don't just add together, they multiply. And I think podcasts are like that by itself, you might be able to poke holes in the strategy, but when you combine it with something else and something else and something else, it gets more and more powerful, like a funnel does. It really fills that top line funnel space so well. And if you're looking for it to convert buyers, it may not do that, but it'll still add value.
Right.
And so looking for non-qualitative ROI, right? Looking for qualitative ROI instead of quantitative, I think is like a way people can understand that it's adding value in intangible ways.
Right.
And that's hard because we live in a world where the money drives everything. But to be able to tell that story, marketing is about storytelling, right? And so to be able to tell the story of how the podcast combines with this for something more powerful, something a lot of marketers haven't really gained awareness of.
And you're speaking something that's really interesting is like the measurable aspects of this thing. You're saying qualitative, quantitative. Quantitative is, did we make a sale? How do you help your clients get to a qualitative ROI from their podcast? Do you have a set of metrics that you have, or do you have certain things that you look for, downloads or social chatter? How do you measure that qualitative aspect?
We try to find some element of their initiative that is measured and look for ways to feed it. Whether that's, I have a tangible example of one of the clients we have was a startup, and they were trying to drive people to their it was awareness, and essentially an awareness campaign about their service. And they wanted to drive people to the page about the podcast because it would tell them about the rest of the services. And so the metric was not how many downloads, although that's fun to track and you feel progress when it occurs, but actually like how many clicks on that website. And that drives a different strategy, right? Because if I don't care what the count on Spotify is or on Apple Podcasts, I really only care, then it's really about sharing clips on social media that get people to click on your page through that. And so the clarity around what you're trying to drive it to is really essential. So you don't get distracted by these numerical things that other podcasters might find valuable. And so getting into that. And so in the case of these, you can actually, from season 1 to season 2 with this company I'm talking about, they had, we're driving to that page and we said, hey, I bet we could drive more hits to that page if each episode had its own page that had that specific episodes, not just all the episodes with the newest one on top, but that specific episode and how it relates to your business, or like then the business information. In the aggregate, I bet we can drive more to those sum total pages than we can that one page because of the specificity. And what we found was we got 4 times as many people when we moved to that model clicking on the sum total pages than we did off of the single page off of them. And so it's being able to play with these little mechanisms and levers and say, does this drive that? And so podcasting, I think too, is like, you have to embrace a little bit of an experimental nature. Like you're scientists. Like we're like, hey, if we move this piece, what happens? If we move this piece, what happens? And so it is a mix of an art and a science in that sort of way. And, helping people get some, they're driving like this, and just sort of putting some context around where their blinders are to kind of help it all happen ends up being our job.
Awesome. And it's tricky too to try and go from, this audio you're listening to getting people to take some kind of action, online or make a phone call or something like that. But I mean, really, these are kind of a lot of the issues that content marketing in general faces. I mean, how do we get people to consume and take action? And I think podcasts are a really unique kind of opportunity for that stuff. So I was kind of curious, Jake and I have some experience with the lawyers. So we kind of understand the pitfalls and barriers there. But do you have any other stories like that? Any content marketing or podcast that you've worked on that was like an amazing ending, or the other side of it where, it just went straight to hell?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have any sort of extremes to share, but I can certainly say, like, one of our clients, this is sort of it petered off situation for them. Was they built a podcast around their strength of what they could talk about instead of what their customers would want to hear. And we gave them feedback in the early decision-making process that said, hey, I mean, it's great to lead with your strength. And of course, people, some people will want to hear this, but it doesn't really connect the thread to your end listener. In fact, this other place where you don't show I always say, like, you can either be authoritative or curious, and I don't think that authoritative is necessarily the way. When you're trying to attract customer, being curious about things opens more doors. And so instead of being curious about a space they didn't really know as well, the space between them and their customers, they decided to show their authority of what they knew because they thought it might attract more people widely. But that's the wrong kind of niche action, right? Like it's niching in the wrong direction a little bit. And so we got through 2 seasons with them, and now they're like, oh, I think we're going to have to go back to the drawing board with this. And they may not use us to do it. We might be guilty by association on this project, even though I recall exactly how it went, which was we proposed the thing that they're now realizing more than 2 years ago. And that they said, oh, well, that doesn't really seem to add up for us, and so um, I could have insisted more, but I felt like I was going to lose the deal, and so
Right.
there's this push and pull, and making it was better than not making it, but they're not going to renew and they're not going to double down on this strategy. They do have to go back to the drawing board, and it may not be with me.
Mm, mm. And me and Paul are talking, and it's the difference in between like a lecture versus a conversation. You're saying curiosity over authority. I just think there's so many, branded podcasts out there that they don't think of what an audience would be interested in hearing. And I think, as a musician and as a performer, you're on stage, as a wedding DJ, you're like, oh my God, they're not feeling it. Or, like we've played 7 ballads in a row and people are sleeping. I mean, like you can pick up on those things viscerally and switch it and get the set list tight. But, I think there's something about the pivotable. Is pivotable a word? But the ability to pivot from performing is like, man, if I could just apply that to the way we have marketing communications, it's like a marriage. But I think so many people are, as you said, blinded by what they're doing. They don't really see the outside opportunities that they could possibly make connections. I mean, do you see that often with your clients? Do you have to really talk them off of the authority cliff, or,
Most of them, I kind of see it, differently by industry a little bit. Like some industries are more, like the startups are where there's this authority, this need to have the right answer and to be the decisive move and all this thing.
right?
And I'm a little less interested in that kind of energy to me, and we work with a couple academic institutions, and they're well versed at being a leader, but also seeking knowledge and seeking growth and everything. And
Mm,
so, working with universities, that's an interesting one for me because there's this understanding that it's about a constant growth, pursuit.
hmm.
And so I really do see it differently in different places. I actually have a federal agency client. I can't say which agency, but
Mm.
uh, they're surprising me because they are so open to show their curiosity, and they're so ready. Not, they don't have other meetings like this in their day, right? We're
Right.
talking, this is the moment where they get to breathe and be creative and be. They don't have to be like, I know the answer, or like, I know my position, I know my relation to you.
Right.
Like the hierarchy is disrupted a little bit, and so, um, I'm not sure exactly where I was going with all that, but
Ooh, I
I
love
think
it.
that there's a sense of I'm now trying to gauge that earlier in the sales process of how much are they wanting to, like, how willing are they to be wrong when they're talking with me? They don't have to be wrong on mic, but they should be willing to be wrong and to hear what I'm saying and go, oh, yeah, no, I hadn't thought of that. And if I don't get that from the conversation, it's probably not going to go somewhere,
Well, and
Wow.
because,
it's
yeah.
yeah, and it's hard to get, especially, people like business, owners or leaders or C-suite guys who are used to directing. Like I have a hard time trying to say, what you need is empathy. Imagine yourself in the audience. Would you want to hear you? You know? I mean,
Well,
seriously.
I forget where I was just having this conversation with somebody, but all likelihood is it's that the CEO wants to be the host, and it's an ego thing,
Yep.
and they're like, oh, well, I'm the figurehead, so I need to be seen and all this kind of stuff. They're working on a different set of priorities when the listener probably wants to hear from end users. Like, let's get an end user to be the host, because the end user knows the pain points. They've struggled with it themselves. They're relatable. Maybe they interview the CEO once, but that is not the position you're bringing. And so, in a lot of startups, the CEO kind of has a little bit of a God complex, and that's what that role takes. And so it's not that
Right.
they're wrong. It's just that they're not the person to show that vulnerability for the audience to hear it.
And you bring up a really good point because we have produced branded podcasts before, and one of the ideas that didn't go anywhere was this a lawyer that we were working with wanted to be the host, and great, really great presence, strong writing skills, but they didn't have the time. Like your CEO is another thing. Like people like podcasts, great. They don't know what goes into it. And the fact that I need availability, we do need to maybe have some loose, approximations on what it's going to take. It might take more, the edits might come back and we might need to scrap things. I mean, can you kind of unpack those barriers that you see, particularly around folks that just don't have time to put invested into a podcast and producing it properly?
Yeah, that's definitely, often when they reach out to us, they're wanting to outsource the whole thing or all but the hosting job. And
Right.
that's not a bad impulse. But to get to the point where that arrangement can go, we have to go through a bunch of meetings or else I'm going to execute it in the wrong direction for you.
Yeah.
And so I think the host has to be willing and kind of into the weekly cadence of the act where you're researching something and you're thinking about your guest and you're kind of doing it. And if it's just hey, feed me the bullet points, I'm going to jump in, you're going to have to work harder to make something that relates to people. And so to me, again, as you get closer to the people who are experiencing the problem, the better you're going to be with that, because those people are they need to do this work to understand it anyway, and they're hungry, and that hunger shows up as effort, and that relates back to musicians too, I think, right? If when you're hungry, you're out there getting out, doing all these things, and you're willing to try a bunch of stuff. And that's when some magic can happen. It's when you're convinced your path is right, that you close your mind to the serendipity, or this is the chance things that can also influence stuff.
And then really quickly, it kind of hit on me is if you want to write one good song, you're probably going to have to write 100 bad ones. If you want to nail this line, you're going to have to practice it 100 times, and then maybe that increases the odds of you nailing it. But I think a lot of marketing, because it's budgetarily constrained, because there's times, because there's resources, all those kind of barriers there, most people don't understand that the quantity brings the quality. They want to start quality right off the bat, and it's just can you maybe speak to, that you got to kind of push out a couple episodes? You're not going to see this instantly. How the marketing effects from that, quantity versus quality, go Lynz.
Yeah. Well, the podcast sort of routine really benefits repeat action, right? And
Right.
so you can't achieve at first round what you can achieve at the 20th or the 40th or the 100th. They're just not
Absolutely.
that's available to you. And
Right.
I mean, like a musician, musicians have to wrap their head around, I'm always getting better and I still need to keep getting better. No matter what level I get to, I will notice that there's another layer that I can learn. So the growth mentality, I think, really, really is important. And in all marketing, no one wants to put out a flop ever, right?
Ever.
No one, but the thing is, you got to put out a bunch of flops, and maybe you figure out how to do them at lower stakes. Musicians can do that by playing a house concert until they can get to bigger things, or they play an open mic, or there's that sort of options for you. Where's the marketing open mic? Oh man,
Yo.
that's
Hey,
a great
whoa.
idea.
Hey,
for
yo,
an
yo,
event.
hold on.
Hey.
Whoa.
Hey.
Whoa. I need to sign up some insurance waivers before
Yeah.
things just burn down right now.
Yeah.
Honestly, though, where is it? There is none. And I don't know, is open mic the place? But everybody says, I just did an open mic and I just, and, now they're famous. You're making such a good point. I'm sorry. Did that blow my mind?
It did. No, that was insane. Well,
It blew mine. I didn't think of it beforehand.
but it comes from someone who spent what 2 years doing stand-up comedy. I mean,
Right.
that right there, there's not a lot of people who can come through that and not be like, yeah, it takes a long time to get really good at something like telling a joke. That ain't easy, man.
No.
And like same kind of thing. Like you have to be completely willing to just, yeah, I'm gonna, you know what, tonight no matter how hard I try, I'm gonna suck, but I'm gonna only suck for a little bit. We'll
I'm gonna
get better.
adjust my suck from the last time in this one way and see if it changes.
I mean, oh yeah,
And man, I mean, we should put on an event called. I'm a collaborative junkie, so to me, I'm like, I don't want to go do this by myself, guys. Let's do this together.
I'm in.
Because I do think, the place to practice, it's an open ground. One, you learn from watching other people practice too. The open micers learn from each other. They're like, ooh, that's either really good and I should try it, or okay, don't do what he did. And so that sort of safety environment, but with an audience, the thing about open mic is you have to have the stakes have to exist, but they're much lower.
Yeah.
And people probably didn't pay to be there, and it's just an added value to their bar night or whatever.
Well, can I just
Well,
say? Okay, go ahead, Paul.
No, all I was going to say was that I don't do stand-up comedy, but music-wise, whenever I'm doing an open mic or open jam or whatever, the audience is 90% everybody else who showed up to play.
And that's kind of what it has to be. It's, at the time you're like, well, why am I doing this? I'm not going to get any fans. You're like, well, you're not any good yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, hate to tell you, but that's why you're here.
Well, and then connecting it to marketing is very interesting, because I'm just thinking like, well, what's the marketing open mic? It's social media. Oh, we'll just put something out there. Just put something out, and whatever.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of marketers, watching, and then you see Wendy's or Steakums or one of these things, or most recently the M&M kind of thing. Candy, not rapper, but you get to see how other marketers are behaving in a low stake environment, but still they're still looking for those quantitative things, and the judgments are harsh, the budgets are tight, the CMO life cycle is shortening to the size of a housefly. I mean, if there was such a place where people could really start seeing great advertisement, like, wow, that's how that works, and figuring out how it works and why, and then getting a chance at the open mic. I mean, it's amazing.
Give people a time limit. They can sign up for a list. They show up, and if they want feedback, they can state the kind of feedback they're looking for, or they could just got just a weekly place, maybe or monthly, whatever. Any kind of thing that's just like, hey, you can. We're onto something.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it more while we're recording. Let's talk about
Google AdWords poetry slam.
Yeah, let's ChatGPT write me a description for that.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Before we give away all our secrets, if you could give one piece of advice to people who are looking to start a podcast out of all of this, what would it be?
Oh man, one piece. I have a dozen. But I would say get clear on why you're doing it. Understand what you want to achieve with it. Don't get stuck in the metrics of the end goal. Like try to break down the small first steps. The thing about a podcast is a project management job, a multimedia editing job, a copywriting job. It's a bunch of different roles all rolled into one. And so be ready to be a utility knife, right? Like while your content might need to niche down, your skill sets need to broaden. And either if you don't have the time or bandwidth to do that, get a team. It's not a single task action. It is dozens of task action.
Yeah. Plan accordingly. So Lynz, you've given us so many wonderful things, and reflected with, these musician marketers here on this side. And we can't thank you enough, but you are constantly asking really deep questions on social media, things that get people thinking, insights that you share. Like you're very open with that, and I can see where it comes from. Is just grab the mic and say, "Has anybody else felt like this?" And you really make social media like a social experience. So if people want to connect with you and learn more about you, Lynz, online, where can they do that?
I think the best place to get that kind of material from me is LinkedIn. Just look me up, Lynz Floren. There's nobody else named that in the professional world. I've seen a couple on the other social medias, but and then, if you want to hear sort of the creative side of me, I've got an album on Spotify. I've got my Instagram is probably more where like the creative expression stuff goes at the moment. And then my company, Growth Network Podcasts, the origin of that is that it's about a growth mentality. This is personal and professional growth mixed with network, which is social. It's a social thing. You got to do it with other people. You got to connect. And we just happen to make podcasts. So if you like that growth mentality meets the social bit, that shows up on all of our socials for the company as well.
Time for a sound quiz.
Are you ready?
Yes, I am ready.
What is your favorite sound in the world?
Cat purring.
I love it.
I'm a cat guy, and when my cat's purring, it's like I not only hear it, but I feel it. Like the sounds that you feel and hear at the same time, like that.
Beautiful. And what is your least favorite sound in the world?
The sound of somebody brushing their teeth on a TV show or movie. It's like makes me want to die.
That is so awesome.
That's so
It's
specific.
specific.
Yeah, right? It's the only reason it's awesome.
It didn't, I mean, like I didn't have any, there was no pause there. I knew
No, absolutely
viscerally.
not. That was fantastic.
Totally new. Well, that's nice to know. Yeah. I mean, and now
When
I'm
those when those Foley guys go to town and make it really authentic sounding, I've turned off shows. Yeah.
Perfect. Very slice of life stuff from Lynz here. Okay, and now we're going to play you some sounds. You don't know what they are, but you're going to have to guess. And here's the first one.
Dig Dug? Or video, it's an early video game.
Should we give it to you one more time? Give it to you one more time?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Maybe Pac-Man.
Oh, bing, 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 bing. Nice, Lynz.
I could place it in the time chronology of my life. That's where that was.
Totally.
You fed some quarters into that one. All right,
Mhm.
Here's the next one. Ooh.
It sounds very familiar. Like I've heard those that combination of sounds before somewhere, and I cannot place it. I mean, it's obviously an ocean scene. There's a thing, but it relates to something like a specific piece of content somewhere, and I can't place it.
One more time.
Man, I'm gonna feel dumb as soon as you tell me. I can't pull it.
What is it, Paul?
It's a loon.
It's a loon.
A loon. But it's a very they use that a lot for the in the woods or in a graveyard. That's in a lot of graveyard scenes, which is hilarious because there's no loons in graveyards.
No loons in graveyard. Yeah, no, it's a from a sound library that is used and stuff. I can tell that. But yeah, cool.
Totally.
Had no idea what animal.
All right. So you're 1 for 3. Here's the third one. Here we go.
Run for the border. Taco Bell.
Bingo! Give this man a quesadilla.
That's exactly. I would love one. That is. I would play. I would join a show where all we did was that. Honestly, that is so much fun.
Sounds Like Marketing is a production of Audio Content Lab. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you find your podcasts, and follow Audio Content Lab for the latest in sound marketing advice. Until next time. Audio Content Lab.